Hi, I'm Lisa Wallem with Directional Learning, and I welcome you, teacher and parents, to our Teacher Parent Edition. So, today we're going to be starting middle letters. Middle letters are letters that either point towards the left and the right, or they just go right down the middle, or maybe their bumps are all over the place, or maybe they don't have bumps and they're all over the place. So, before we start middle letters, remember we always review. So, your student should have already watched the LMR 123 videos. They only have to watch that one time. But before you start middle letters, remember you have to review because that's what we do. We teach in chunks. So, remember you'll review sorting letters. Remember those three directional columns. You'll call the sounds out with the characters and link the sound, and they'll find it and put it in the directional column, and they're always saying the sound. Then you'll move the tongue letters with this line just like this. And remember, their bumps point towards the left. You'll call the letter and the sound or the character, and they'll write it and link the sound. And those bumps will point towards the left. And then row letters point towards the right. You'll call the letters and the character, and they'll write it and link the sounds. And remember, we're calling them in the order they learned. Then, now you're ready for middle letters to teach them. But all you'll need is the same supplies. You'll need a whiteboard, some markers, and maybe some expo markers. All right, let's get started. So, before we get started, I wanted to talk about our letters to you. Now, you can tell I have the pictures here so that you can kind of link the letters to the pictures for your student. So you can see I have the Indian elephant here. Notice he has a bump. So the Indian elephant has a bump, and the bump can kind of point towards the left or towards the right. So he lives in the middle. And then you can see our tall building. It just goes right down the middle. So it lives in the middle. And Tommy the turtle, you can kind of see he has the tall building in him. And then he has the bed that goes from 1 to 3. So his lines are all over the place. He doesn't have bumps that point towards the left and right, but his lines go all over the place. So he lives in the middle. And Slimy the snake, you can kind of see he has bumps here and bumps pointing towards the right, towards the left, or towards the right. So he's all over the place. So he lives in the middle, considered a middle letter. Same with our dentist sound. You thought it was an apple, then it turns into a rock. See, the bumps are pointing towards the left, towards the capital L building, or towards that one lefty dragon. And it's pointing towards the right, or towards the red reptile tree or the road. So its bumps are all over the place. So it lives in the middle. So you kind of get the idea, right? I wanted to show you that. This is why we call them middle letters. And the yak's kind of all over the place. It doesn't have bumps, but goes all over the place. And our mountain monsters, it goes in both directions. So we call it a middle letter. And same thing with our Sharpie scissors and our one bird and our two birds. They don't have bumps, but they have lines that kind of go all over the place. So they live in the middle. And same thing with our sleepy letter. So that's why we call them middle letters. So let's begin writing. Okay, let's start teaching the students. So by this time, you can either have your column set up for the students labeled, or sometimes what I do is I give them a ruler and I have them make the line for a tall building. Then I have them label the columns, just like that. So you can remind them that to make the capital L building, you go down the building, or L goes down the building. She makes her wish, and then she goes to bed towards the red reptile tree. So you can do that. And you can have them make the number 1, the one lefty dragon, and you can have them make the capital R building. You go down the building and around towards the red reptile tree. See the bump? And you give them a leg. And there's the red reptile tree. And they can make the number 3. Remember, the bumps always point towards the end of the page on the number 3. And if you follow that road, it will take you to the right. So, and then I quiz them. This means the left, or the capital L building. This is the one lefty dragon, and it stands for the left. And if you move the capital L building this way, that's the left. And you can look at the tongue here. This is the left. So this whole side of the building is the left. And this side of the building is the right, or the 3 direction. That's what this means on this side. So today we're going to be writing middle letters, and middle letters they're they're not really tricky. Actually, middle letters are easier. I tell them the middle letters, you're going to have bumps pointing towards the left or the one direction, and the bumps are going to point towards the right, the three direction. Or you may have lines all over the place. If you have lines all over the place, then they're middle letters. You write them right down the middle. And sometimes you'll have letters that just go right down the middle of the building. So that's what we're going to do with them. So our first middle letter that we're going to show them is the Indian elephant. And the Indian elephant is going to have a bump. And the bump points towards the left and the right. That's why it's a middle letter. Okay. And we're going to write on this building here. So I'm going to pick pink today to show them as a teacher, and my student's going to be purple today. Remember, we're going to do it the same way that we taught tongue letters and row letters, where you show them, they trace if needed, and then they write it and link the sound. And you're going to use the characters too. So for the Indian elephant, I like to show them. I say first, when we make the Indian elephant, I make his dot on the building. See, there's the dot. Then I give him a trunk, not a long trunk, but a small trunk. And his sound is eh, eh, eh. So I give him an I. Now I want you to notice, look at the bump here. Do you notice that our bump is pointing towards the left and towards the right or towards the one and the three direction? When that happens, guess what? We call this a middle letter. We just write it right down the middle because the bump is pointing towards the left and the right, it's considered a middle letter. So that's how we do that. And so you show them, if they're younger, they can trace it. Remember, if they're older, they can go into just writing it. So if they were a student, they could trace it if they were younger or if they needed it. And then they can just go ahead and start designing it. Remember, that Indian elephant looks at you, then he sprays you off with his trunk, trunk, trunk. That would be icky, eh, eh, eh. And I give her a sound, so I give him an I. Remember, he is called the schwa too. He's going to control some of our other letters. So that's how I would teach that to them and explain why it's a middle letter, because it points both ways. Now, for the hand motion for this sound, I simply put a dot above my head. I show them, and I put a pretend dot above my head, and I say, icky, Now, you notice, like, sometimes I'll repeat the sound, a few times, maybe 3 times. Some students love that. Some students do not like the repeating. So if they don't like the repeating, usually they'll tell you and just say the sound once. Eh. So remember, every student's different. So just give them what they need. Okay, let's move on to the next letter. Okay, our next letter is pretty simple. It's a tall, tall building with city lights. And this letter, I'll show you. It just goes right down the middle. Watch. And it's tall. It's a tall, tall building with city lights. Notice that this letter doesn't have any bumps. No bumps. It just goes right down the middle. So that's why it's a middle letter. And the sound for this is oh, oh, oh. Link it to city lights. It's a tall building. So they'll trace it, say the sound, and then write it, or just go right into writing if they're older. So remember, they'll write it and then say the sound. Oh, oh, oh. Remind them, it's kind of like the Indian elephant, but it doesn't have a dot. And notice the Indian elephant's trunk is shorter. Tall building is really tall. And link it to city lights so they make the sound connection of oh, oh, oh. We're going to make is Tommy the turtle. And Tommy the turtle lives in the tall building. So let me show you. First, we make the tall building. Then we put Tommy the turtle to bed. So we make a line that looks like a bed, watch. And you start from 1, see I'm on the one side, and then you cross it to 3. So Tommy the turtle lives in the tall building, so you make a tall building. Then you put him to bed, and you make a sleepy line from 1 to 3. And the sound for that is t, t, t. So remember, they'll trace it, make the tall building, and then put him to sleep. Then they can make it. So you make the tall building, then you pick up your pen, and you go from 1 to 3 to cross them. And you made Tommy the turtle. T, t, t. The next letter we're going to make is Slimy the snake, and he has bumps. His bumps will point towards the right and towards the left. But to make Slimy the snake, I always tell them Slimy the snake has the cat in him. So first I make the cat, and I make it a climbing cat, and then an upside down cat. And that's how you make Slimy the Snake. So, see, it's a cat, and then he goes upside down. And that's Slimy the Snake. I always tell them this is his tongue on this side, up here. So, first, you start making the cat, then an upside down cat. And you've made Slimy the Snake. S, s, s. Remember, they can trace and say s, and then they can design, depending on their age. So, I make a climbing cat first, and then I make him go upside down. And the sound for that is s, s, s. Now, this is a very confusing letter, but I always find when I show them to make the cat first and then an upside down cat, they see it and it makes it super neat for them. Okay, let's move on to the next letter. Before we move on, I want to show you one more way to make Slimy the Snake in case it's confusing for them. You can do a dot here on the 3 side and a dot here on the 1 side. Notice how it's kind of a diagonal line? Then you can teach them to make the cat first. So start here and then go upside down and connect. It's just an easy way to connect. And then the second time they make it, then have them put their pen where the dot would be. They would pretend it's here, there's a dot here, and make the cat and then connect it to that imaginary dot. So that would be the second way you could show them if this way is hard. Show them with the dots, the second way. Okay, let's move on. Now, our next letter that we're going to make is our dentist sound, or our rock. And it looks like a rock. Rocks are round, right? So this is how you make it. It's a middle letter because it has bumps pointing towards the 1 direction or the 3 direction. Watch. We start it on the 1 side like this. I start to make it like the apple, but then I turn it into the rock. You thought it was an apple, but it turned out to be a rock when you bit into it. So now you're at the dentist. Ah, ah, ah. Notice its bumps pointing towards the left or the 1 direction and towards the 3 direction or the right direction. That's why it's a middle letter. So you start it like the apple, like we would start the apple. Then you turn it into a rock. And the sound is ah, ah, ah. So that's how you make it. And you always start on the 1 direction. You want to tell them you start it like the apple. You take a bite, and then it turns out to be a rock. So that's why you're at the dentist. Ah, ah, ah. So they will write it, trace it if they need to, and write it. And there you go. It's just a circle. Our next letter we're going to show them is the biggest mountain wins. And it's a middle letter because it has a bump pointing towards the left and the right, or towards the 1 and the 3 direction. So I simply show them. I make a mountain on this side. See the mountain? And then I make another mountain on the 3 side. And I made the biggest mountain wins. I tell them that because it's going to help with phonics. Biggest mountain wins. So have them either trace it and then they can go ahead and write it. Make sure they're always linking the sound for this letter. And you can tell them that their mouth comes together when they make that sound. Because sometimes they'll get that. Some students get that confused with the little mountain. So make sure that they see that their lips are coming together when they say that sound. Okay? So another way I show them too, I'll show you, is I show them if they see the red reptile tree in it, they can make it like the red reptile tree if it's easier. Just like this, the red reptile tree, 1 mountain, 2 mountains. Pretty easy. Okay, let's move on. Okay, the next letter we're going to have them make is our Sharpie Scissors. And our Sharpie Scissors, it's unique, actually. I get kids coming in here making it different ways because it's a confusing letter and it's a middle letter. But it doesn't have any bumps, but it has lines kind of going all over the place. That's why it lives in the middle. So how I teach them is I tell them it has an almost sleepy line. So maybe I'll show them this letter here. See how it has a tall building in it? It kind of looks like a person standing up really tall. And that's how your body would look, standing up tall. Now, this line here, we call this a bed because this is how your body would look like lying on a bed, right? Now, an almost sleepy line, well, it's kind of in the middle of this. So it's an almost sleepy line, so it just kind of goes down. It looks like your body almost falling asleep. If you were falling asleep, watch. You start here on the 1 side, you go down, and you make a diagonal line. So a diagonal line, I call it an almost sleepy line because it doesn't look like you're awake, it doesn't look like you're asleep, but it kind of looks like you're falling asleep. That's how you would look if you were falling asleep. So you start it from the 1 and you go down, then you pick up your pen and then you go down and make another almost sleepy line. And this sound right here, remember, if you bring the king and the snake together, you say the k, s, then blend ks. That's the sound for the Sharpie scissors. So you can bring out those wooden letters if they're having problems remembering the sound. Then, remember, if they're younger, they will trace and say the sound, or they can go and design it themselves. So do an almost sleepy line, start on the 1 side, pick up your pen, go to the 3 side, and go down. And you made the Sharpie scissors. Kss, kss, kss. And when they make the sound, remember, you can put your arms together for them or your fingers together to make that sound. You can go back and forth with either your arms or your 2 fingers to make the letter X and do the sound kss, 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 and say, don't they look like Sharpie scissors? Kss, kss. And that's how Sharpie scissors would sound. Our next letter we're going to make is our yak. And I call this a yak got a haircut. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because the yak can look like the scissors if we were to take away this line here. So that's kind of what we're building. So first, to build the yak, we're going to do a diagonal line, but we're going to give it a haircut right at the building. So give it a haircut, then pick up your pen like you would for the scissors, and then you're going to go down. And let's build it. So I always think building it, showing them is really helpful. So first, I give the yak a haircut. I do a diagonal line, an almost sleepy line. Then I pick up my pen and I do another diagonal line. And that's yak got a haircut. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I just say that's the yak that got a haircut. Notice that he's missing hair down here, or he's missing a leg, you can say. So you first give him a haircut, then pick up the pen and give them a diagonal line, and then they'll take their pen, trace, or either design it. And remember, they're always linking the sound. And I wanted to show you the hand motion for this. Just make your hands like your 2 fingers like a pair of scissors and do a cutting motion down just like the scissors and say, yeah, got a haircut. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the hand motion for that sound. And just remember, when you do the hand motion and you make the scissors with your one hand, it works best that way. So with your left hand. Okay, we're going to do the next letter is our bird. And it does look like the yak. Our bird has a pointy beak. So it's going to be this part here. Do you see that? So the beak is pretty easy. It's a bird. So a bird has a beak, right? So what I do is I show them how to make it first. I show them you make a diagonal line to the building and then you make another diagonal line. And you made a bird's beak. So, doesn't it look like a beak? Now notice its lines. It doesn't have any bumps, but its lines kind of go all over the place. That's why it's a middle letter, just like our yak and our scissors. And it has sleepy lines in it too, like our other letters. So because the lines are all over the place, it's a middle letter. So they'll go ahead and build it themselves. So they'll get their pen out after, if they need to trace it, they'll trace it and they'll make the bird's beak. Just like that. Now, if they're having problems making it, an easy way to show them, which will help with our next letter, with our watch out letter, is make it all on one side, like this. Make the beak on the one side. This is easier, so when we go to the next letter, the watch out letter, you'll have a beak on this side and a beak on this side. I prefer this way to make it, but some like to go right down the middle, so let them choose. So, and the hand movement for this is if you do the peace sign in one of your hands, make the V with your hand and say, v, v, v. See, it's a bird's beak. And you can make the sound, v, 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 or you can say, keep the peace too. So you made the bird's beak. Let's move to the next letter. So our watch out letter is going to have 2 beaks, one beak on this side and one beak on this side. And I call it my watch out letter. And let me show you. So I just make it like this. And it's 2 birds that came together. So I make one beak on this side and then a beak on this side. And you could do this with your hands. Even for this letter, you can make this letter with your fingers, right? You can make a V and you can say v, v, v for the bird. So then when you do this letter here, you can do the same thing. You can make a bird's beak on your left hand and your right hand. And then what I do is I bring those two letters together and I call it the watch out letter, and I look through them and I call it the watch out letter. Wah, wah, wah. And it's two birds that came together. Wah, wah, wah. So that's why this way is super easy to show them, because it's one beak on this side and another beak on this side. And two birds that came together. See their beaks? They're two pointy beaks that came together. Wah, wah, wah. And we call it the watch out letter. So remember, they're going to do the same thing. They can trace it, say the sound, or they can just go right into writing it. Wah, wah, wah. And our next letter we're going to make, well, actually, let's write it. So one beak on this side and one beak on that side. Wah, wah, wah. Our last letter that we're going to make is our sleepy letter, because it has lines all over the place, like these letters here. So guess what? I tell them it's a sleepy letter, and remember, the sleepy letter has a number 7 in it. So first I show them, I make the number 7, and then I give it a bed. And you made the sleepy letter. Z, z, z. So notice that its lines are all over the place. That's why it's a middle letter. So first I make the number 7, see the number 7, and then I give it a bed. And the hand motion for this is I put my palms together and I lay my head into my hands and say, it's 7 o'clock, time to get to bed. Dream about my sound. Z, z, z. So that's the hand movement for that. So remember, they will trace it if they need to and link the sound, and then they'll try to write it themselves. And you just remind them that it has the number 7 in it, and then you give it a bed. That's the most helpful way to show them, because I get a lot of students in here that with this letter, it's very confusing. But once I show them it has the number 7 in it, it makes it super simple for them. Just make sure that they see the number 7 and then they give it a bed. Now, if they cannot make the number 7, say they're flipping their letters, then take the number out of it and say, let's make it a different way. You first make a sleepy line, because it's a sleepy letter. So you go from 1 to 3, then you give it a staircase or a diagonal line, and then another bed. Now you made bunk beds. See, here's the bed. Up there you would sleep on. There's a staircase to get to it, a diagonal line, and then another bed. See, it takes the number out, but it shows them how to make it in a simple way. That's how I would show them. Of course, they would trace it, link the sound, and of course, write it if they need to write it. So there you go. We just taught you how to write all our middle letters. So the next step I would do is I would have them erase the board, and you will call out the letter in the order they learn and see if they remember. So you would call out I. That's my Indian elephant. Can you write it? So they would put the dot first and the trunk, and then you would go to the next letter. And you can help them if they need help, but this is a great way to end the session because you're reviewing what they learned. So now you learned how to write all our middle letters with directional learning. Now we're almost done. Now we're moving to picture writing. So once you show them how to do middle letters, now it's time to move to picture writing. We thank you for watching Directional Learning, and we can't wait to teach you more.